I thought I was responding as an adult, only to realize that I was reacting as a child. One of those moments happened during a family dinner. A family member looked at me and said, "Aren't you afraid your wife is going to leave you for another woman? You don't wear makeup anymore. You don't look like yourself. You're so consumed with being a mom." And sitting there at that table, I broke down crying. Not because of makeup, not because of my marriage, but because in that moment, I wasn't a grown woman sitting at a dinner table. I was a little girl again. And motherhood has taught me that sometimes the hardest part isn't raising our children. Sometimes it's healing the parts of ourselves that still show up when we're trying to. Welcome back to Trust Your Motherhood. I'm Yuri, and I'm so grateful you're here. For almost 7 years now, motherhood has changed a lot of things in my life. But one thing I never expected it to teach me was boundaries. When I became a mom, it was one of the most joyful and exhausting seasons of my life. I quickly realized that I no longer had time to get ready the way I used to before having children. There were no more mornings spent playing music, taking my time, doing my makeup, doing my hair, and carefully putting together an outfit. My priorities had shifted. Being present with my children became more important to me than being perfectly put together. Now I know that there are mothers who are able to maintain those routines, and that's wonderful. But my experience was different. My wife and I had our daughters only 2.5 months apart. So while they weren't technically twins, we were raising them often felt like we had twins in the house. Our girls were also pandemic babies. We spent most of those early years in a world that suddenly had become very small. We stayed close to home, grateful for our backyard, our walks together, and simple moments we shared as a family. When my wife returned to work, it was just me and the girls most days, and thank God for our friend Titi Debbie who helped me. I shout out to Queen Titi Debbie. My focus wasn't on makeup or how I looked. My focus was on helping these two little humans grow. I remember eagerly waiting for our Love Avery boxes to arrive every month or every 2 months. I would read every page, learn about every activity, and use every toy and tool to help support their development. I wanted to be present for it all. The milestones, the discoveries, the little moments that seem ordinary until they're gone. I was tired, exhausted most of the time. Every other week, every other month with styes in my eyes from lack of sleep. And I have one right now. Like so many parents, I was running on very little sleep and low energy. But I kept going because I was completely and utterly in love with this season of my life. There's a saying that goes, the days are long, but the years are short. And now, as my girls get ready to turn 7, I understand exactly what that means. Looking back, I don't think I stopped focusing on myself. I think that I was simply so in awe with my children that everything else faded into the background for a while. It was the 4th of July, and every year my uncle holds a family reunion. The weekend was exactly what you would hope for. We were laughing, dancing, catching up, spending time together. While I was enjoying the company of my family, I was also doing what I always do, checking in on my girls, making sure they were having fun, helping them with activities, making sure they had eaten, and being present with them. I have always parented differently than what I experienced growing up. I remember the adults being with the adults and the children being with the children. There wasn't a lot of overlap. but I genuinely enjoy being with my kids. I love coloring with them, building with them, making bracelets with them, and being a part of their world. As the weekend came to an end and everyone was getting ready to leave, I found myself sitting with a family member. That's when the conversation shifted. They said, I just want to talk to you. I'm not the I'm not the only one who thinks this. Other people have said it too. You're a slave to your children. The moment that I heard those words, I froze. Suddenly, I wasn't a grown up woman sitting at a family gathering. I was a little girl again. A little girl who had spent years told she was different. The black sheep, the odd one, the weird one. A little girl who never quite felt understood. And what hurt wasn't even the comment itself. What hurt was realizing how quickly I had been transported back to that place. Back. Because the truth is, I don't experience my motherhood the way those words described it. I don't feel trapped by my children. I don't feel burdened by them. I feel grateful for them. I enjoy being present. I enjoy creating memories. I enjoy showing up for the little moments that make up childhood. And as I sat with the experience afterwards, I realized something important. The comment wasn't teaching me about my parenting, it was teaching me about my boundaries. For years, when someone said something hurtful, I would shrink. I would question myself. I would carry their words long after the conversation ended. But motherhood has slowly taught me something different. It has taught me that I don't need everyone to understand the way that I choose to parent. I don't need approval to live in alignment with my values. And I can love my family while still having a voice. I can stay connected while also setting boundaries. For me, that has been one of motherhood's greatest lessons. As I sat with the experience afterwards, the comment wasn't teaching me about my parenting, it was teaching me about my boundaries. For years, when someone said something hurtful, I would shrink. I would question myself. I would carry their words long after the conversation ended. But motherhood has slowly taught me something different. It has taught me that I don't need everyone to understand the way that I parent, the way that I choose to parent. I don't need approval to live in alignment with my values. And I can love my family while still having a voice. I can stay connected while also setting boundaries. For me, that has been one of motherhood's greatest lessons. There was another moment that taught me a lot about boundaries. We were saying goodbye to family, getting ready to leave, when a family member complimented one of my daughters. Then she turned around to my other daughter, who loves to draw, and said, Wow, that's perfect. You drew that perfectly. In a quiet voice, I said, Would you mind not that word, using that word perfect with her? She struggles with perfectionism and can become really upset when things don't go exactly as she imagined it. The family member looked at me and laughed and said, You can't control the way the world responds to your children. That moment stayed with me because, from my perspective, I wasn't trying to control anyone. I wasn't telling her how to think. I wasn't telling her how to feel. I was simply sharing something important about my child. I was letting her know that certain words affect her differently and hoping that she would take that into consideration. What I realized later is that sometimes different generations view boundaries differently. What I see as communication and mutual respect, someone else may see it as control. But boundaries aren't about controlling people, they're about expressing what matters to us. and allowing others to decide what they want to do with that information. As parents, we spend so much time learning who our children are. We learn what encourages them, what hurts them, what motivates them, and what makes them feel safe. One thing that I've learned about my daughters is that they don't need to be perfect. They need to know they are loved. In our home, we work really hard to make sure neither child ever feels more important than the other, more loved than the other, or more valued than the other. In fact, just today, one of my daughters asked my wife, "Who do you love the most?" And without hesitation, my wife said, "I love you all the same." Because that's what we want our children to know. Not that they're perfect, not that they have to earn our love, but that they are deeply loved exactly as they are. And for me, that's what this was really about. It was never about control, it was about care. One of the unexpected gifts of motherhood has been seeing my childhood through a completely different lens. Those experiences with family didn't just hurt because of what they said. They hurt because they brought me back to being a little girl who often felt judged, misunderstood, and voiceless. Long before I became a mother, I promised myself that I wanted to break cycles. I wanted to parent differently, not because I believed anyone was intentionally trying to hurt me, but because there were parts of my childhood that left wounds behind. As I began raising my daughters, something surprising happened. I started looking at my own childhood through the eyes of a parent, and suddenly I understood things differently. For example, there was a period in my childhood where a family member would become frustrated when I lied. Years later, after becoming a mother, I found myself looking at the situation differently. Because when my own children started going through those phases of fibbing or hiding the truth, I don't see a bad child. I see a child who's scared, a child who doesn't yet feel safe enough to tell the truth. And that's changed the way I respond. When my daughters come to me and say, "Mommy, I'm scared. I'm scared that I'm going to get in trouble," I don't immediately focus on what they did wrong. I focus on helping them feel safe enough to tell me the truth. Because honesty grows best in safety, not fear. And through parenting my daughter, I realized something else. The little girl inside me needed the same safety. She needed someone to listen. She needed someone to understand. She needed someone to tell her that making a mistake didn't make her bad. In many ways, motherhood has allowed me to become the adult I needed when I was younger. Not just for my children, but for myself. And I think that's why these family experiences affected me so deeply. They weren't just touching present day wounds, they were touching old ones. The difference is that today I have a voice. Today I can advocate for myself. Today I can set boundaries. And today I can choose which cycles end with me. One of the most important parts of my motherhood journey has been teaching my daughters about boundaries. In many ways, I feel like I'm giving them something I didn't have while growing up. Whenever we're going to a family gathering, we remind them they get to choose how they greet people. If they want to give someone a hug, that's wonderful. If they would rather give a high five, a fist pump, or simply say hello, that's okay too. Because I want them to know that their bodies belong to them. Growing up, that wasn't always the message I received. Like many children, I was often told, "Give your aunt a hug, give your uncle a kiss." affection wasn't always presented as a choice. It was often presented as an expectation. While I know those requests came from a place of love, I've chosen to approach things differently with my own children. I want my daughter to know that they're allowed to listen to their feelings, they're allowed to have boundaries, and they are allowed to decide what feels comfortable for them. There have been times when family members have interpreted that as being rude, and I've gently explained to them they're not being rude. They're learning to trust themselves. They're learning that their comfort matters. They don't have to ignore their feelings just to make someone else comfortable. One of those lessons I learned much later in life was constantly putting everyone else's feelings before your own can come at a cost. I want something different from my daughters. I want them to know that kindness and boundaries can exist together, that they can be respectful while still honoring their own feelings. And maybe that's one of the greatest gifts motherhood has given me, the opportunity to teach my daughters lessons that I'm still learning myself. To give them the agency, confidence, and self worth that I spent years building. And hopefully, because of that, they'll grow up knowing something I had to learn later in life. Their voice matters, their feelings matter, and their boundaries matter too. And choosing boundaries, whether with our family or within our parenting, has been one of the greatest gifts motherhood has given me. Because at the end of the day, my peace and my family's well being will always be a priority. And that's something I'm proud of. Thank you so much for holding space with me today. Boundaries protect what we love. And as I've learned, they're also an act of trust. Trusting ourselves, trusting our values, and trusting our motherhood. Sending you all so much love. Until next time, trust your motherhood.